So in the interest of keeping with our principle and core values at Amazon, we're changing things up just slightly, and we're going to try to expedite my presentation just a little bit in order to get more customer input later on in the session that follows. So basically I'm going to tell you to strap in because I'm going to go through what was a little longer presentation that I crunched into a small period of time. I'm crunching it even further, but I'm from New York, so I can talk really fast. So feel free to, raise your hand and say I'm going too fast, and then I'll say the break's coming up in a second. So just by way of background, prior to about 4 years ago when I joined AWS, I had 17 years in the federal government. First half of that was actually as a computer crime investigator for the Air Force Office of Special Investigation. For those of you that don't know that, if you've seen NCIS, the Air Force version, not as dramatic as they show on TV, but nonetheless still a great job to have. That career led me to another career at the FBI, where I ran a technology organization responsible for supporting those types of investigations. That led me to AWS because one of the things that we had was a huge need to process data very quickly in order to be able to keep bad things from happening to good people. And I know many of you in the room have that same type of job. And therefore, the data that you're dealing with is very important, and therefore you're very intensely focused on security as well as compliance in that realm. So what I'm going to talk about are some of those things. Once again, going towards the theme, I'll go as much detail as I can really quickly, but later on this afternoon there's breakout sessions, some of which that I'll be providing, some of that other partners here at AWS that have a great deal of information and will give you more access to be able to ask those questions that you need to have answered. So in that interest, I'll go ahead and move right straight through. I put this eye chart up here for you just right up front so that you can actually see some of the different various things that you traditionally, the 43 questions that Werner spoke of earlier. Some of that detail is here, and what this is that one slide that you can take. We'll provide, these are available. This is the one slide you can take and kind of have the overview for later on. Werner already brought this up a little bit earlier, and coming up right after him is interesting. He's like an IT rock star in the international technology scene, and I was like, I'm glad there's a break in between because I'm not exactly, the international talking spokesperson that he is. So hopefully we'll move forward here. So we actually have the Security Center, which is right off of our main website, and that provides access to a plethora of security information, obviously the generally publicly available versions of that. The details that are in there are obviously much more macro level. They do dive down into some level of detail for you. But then even further when we talk about compliance a little bit here later, as well as later this afternoon when we have actual compliance and certification types of discussions, we'll be able to provide even more detail as we go forward. So you've seen a version of this slide already. I'm going to hit on the very top part of this. That is the shared responsibility model. As you can imagine, in our environment, for the most part, as in yours, you can only be responsible for that which you have control over. Directly responsible. And in a shared responsibility model that we have, you can imagine that for, say, EC2, which is our virtual machine servers, you actually have a model that's broken out such that we take on the responsibility for, well, let's say, the hypervisor down to the concrete of the data center. And then we actually, work to provide that which is in our responsibility, because you can't touch the concrete of our data center, so you can't be responsible for it directly. But in that same light, one of the things that we have is that above that, on the virtual machine side of the house, because you have the flexibility, like Werner explained, to run whatever operating system you want and to completely manage and own that space. And I, nor my team, have the ability to go in there and touch your data because you actually maintain that right up front. That is one of the things that then the customer takes on that responsibility above that. So thinking of this from a security and compliance and certification angle, one of the things that you have to take into account is when doing certifications, accreditations, or compliance, that we're going to be responsible for some things and you're going to be responsible for others. So that's the nice thing is working in a teamed effort, we can take off that load or that burden that you probably carry today in your own data centers. So everything from the hypervisor down that you're worried about today in your space, that's now my problem, and things that my team actually comes together in order to provide you the means by which to concentrate your resources from that application or that operating system on upward. So bringing those two together actually allows us to do so. The same thing goes with the certification paperwork. Like I said, we got a whole session later on this afternoon that you can join in to get further details on. But all of these different certifications or compliancies all require different layers of information to be provided. So for you as, say, a federal customer to be compliant on the FISMA side of the house, you need everything from the concrete all the way up to the user access in the security continuum. Therefore, we need to be able to provide that which we have responsibility for and the documentation to support that and provide the transparency into being able to provide that. And that's what one of the things that my team is responsible for. And we're able to do so. So we have all these different compliancies. The one thing I'd like to say, and I'll hit on this real briefly as we go forward, is that the interesting part of this is that you would think that each one of these are handled separately as far as the different certifications, if you will, or that we have data centers that are certified for this or for that. In fact, what we actually have is a security model that allows us to be compliant, primarily secure, with compliancy layered on top of that in order to meet those needs that all of our customers have, and have actually integrated it such that our policies, procedures, the information that we are able to provide in support of those, the artifacts or evidence in support of different certifications and accreditation type models, are such that we can meet all of these, and we do meet them across the globe, meaning that we layer all of these compliancies on top of each other such that even if we're operating in the EU, those customers that are operating out of the EU are still getting the security benefit of that which comes out of the FISMA certification process. So what I'm saying is that all the controls that are in place in one data center are the same that are in the other. The only difference to that is we layer on additional controls in that one GovCloud region that we'll talk about here in a minute. Physical security, going to kind of blast through this one. We have really good physical security. It's one of those things that is well understood and has been going on for years. So we do have a means by which to do so. The most important part of this slide is that we operate in a least privilege mode, not only within the data centers from a physical standpoint, but the company itself believes in least privilege when it's broadly broadcast out from the standpoint of a logical access. A cloud environment, obviously logical or network-based access is where most of the access should be coming from. And in this case, that's exactly what we have set up, is that only those administrators or data techs that need to have access to that specific area are provided that. And that's carried through, not only from an access standpoint, but also from an audit and review standpoint. It's no good to keep logs if you don't actually read them or review them. Excuse me for a sec. So this is a reasonably complex slide, actually, when you break it down, so I'm not going to go into too great a detail. But the important part for this is that we actually have an excellent separation that's actually maintained for the actual virtual machines. An example of what I'm showing here is actually a physical interface of a physical server in our data center. On top of that physical interface, we actually run custom in-house built software that's been being run in various iterations from the beginning of EC2, not only in the public, but that which was incubated within Amazon.com prior to going out to the public environment. And that is as an isolation mechanism prior to and below what is traditionally identified as a hypervisor. Then above that, we actually have customer-based firewalls. What this is actually at the hypervisor or even below the hypervisor layer, we're actually providing you the ability to provide allowance into your instances. Why do you have to provide allowance? Wouldn't that be something you'd expect, to be able to access your instances or your virtual machines? We actually enforce a default deny-all firewall at the host level, below what you traditionally have access to, so we have to allow you an allowance list to let access in. And that's where we actually start to gain a little bit of this security advantage, if you will, because now it's even below your direct access, you're being able to provide this allowance list. Above that, we then actually present to the hypervisor what you traditionally know via virtual interfaces. Those virtual interfaces are what then operates or then accesses or allows access forward. So then you have the individual customers above that can create their individual access lists, or security groups as we like to call them, below that. So day in the life of a packet of information, that packet coming over the network hits a physical interface, network interface card. That network interface card passes that information based upon a virtual MAC address, not the IP address, a virtual MAC address that we assign to it. That firewall then says, okay, I know this goes to customer 1. I'm going to run it through the normal checks. I'm going to then pass it in front of, for inspection, to the customer's firewall to see if there's an allowance for this particular type of traffic. It says yes, it goes forward. It says no, it's dropped immediately, never gets to the operating system or anything even in front of it. Real quickly, because I don't want to burn too much time on this, is that this model here, if you look at it from a theoretical standpoint, is the equivalent of taking and maybe more secure, or actually more secure when you dig down into it, taking a local area network of your traditional environment and pulling it into one server. Because each and every customer on here, very much like you could have in your own environment, each and every computer having its own firewalls built in front of it. So you actually have the ability to expand your capability because you're actually gaining more granular control for each and every system rather than just a firewall on the backside of the network. Flying on here. So from a network security side of the house, as you can imagine, coming out of the Amazon.com environment where a very large web presence, have a lot of experience in dealing with those things that you traditionally see in a large-scale network. Starting off at the top, distributed denial of service attacks. There's been all kinds of press and all kinds of fun and issues with these in the past. We actually don't have anything that's super different in this space. What we do have is a lot of experience, and as our senior vice president for AWS likes to say, there's no compression algorithm for that experience, or for experience in general. And that's basically comes down to we're used to dealing with these large-scale DDoS types of attacks, so that way we're able to mitigate them as best can be. The other thing that helps us out is the scale. You heard Werner earlier explaining how much of our growth rate is spiking. So our networks, our bandwidth, our server capacity continues to grow. And the larger scale you are, the larger you have to be in order to be really affected by these sorts of things. Just kind of blowing down through here quick. You can actually review these later on when we have a little bit more time. But an example being IP spoofing. I already told you earlier that we have this virtual MAC address that we identify each and every one by. That's at the host level or the control plane of the cloud. So you as a user could actually change the IP address on your instance, and it would mean nothing to us other than maybe you knock yourself off your own network or your network connectivity, but as far as we're concerned, we're still going to identify you as a virtual MAC address. So spoofing's pretty much out the window right away. These are the types of things that we've implemented such that we're able to allow the level of access that's necessary and availability that's necessary at the same time, providing that scope of responsibility to cordon down the traffic, that which you want to have there, not what I decide should be there. Werner already went over a lot of the fault separation that we provide from regions as well as the availability zones within, basically the fault separation across them. The one thing I'd like to bring up here is it also provides the geographic diversity, and that also provides any piece of data that you place within a region stays in that region. This is an important thing. Imagine from the EU side of the house, you have the EU Data Privacy and Protection Act, which requires them to keep the data in the EU for the most part. So the Ireland-based region, when they place data in there, it stays within that region. For U.S. government customers, definitely wanting to keep their data within the United States, if you place your data in the U.S. East or U.S. West region, it'll stay in that region. These are important things when it comes back to data jurisdictional matters, especially coming back from my past life. Where the data is has a lot of importances to the legality of intercept and things like that as well. So maintaining that is important. We already talked a little bit about VPC, and there's actually a session later on this afternoon that can go into much greater depth. But I wanted to bring this up real quick in order to add a few things on. From my previous experience, one of the things that we've always had that has been of issue is trying to maintain isolation and ownership of the environment, not only of the data itself. And that's where VPC actually sets us kind of apart, in that you have a means by which to go ahead and logically isolate your resources in the cloud while still maintaining the ability to dynamically scale by adding new resources to it. So think of it as, in this case, a data center on a stick. So you can have your data center still have a subnet off of that with IP space that you assign to us into that virtually or logically isolated environment. By having that, you then gone ahead and have the ability to still dynamically scale, add capacity, and remove it, at the same time maintaining the IP addressing scheme that's associated with it. This is very powerful. You can actually go ahead and set it up, and the way that it initially was set up is that the VPN tunnel, the IPsec tunnel between your data center and ours, was the only means by which to get into that, walled garden, if you would. And that's the way that I still see a lot of, on the federal side, a lot of customers still do it. So that all the traffic comes in, goes through your predetermined location, through that location into our cloud, and then back out. So any of that security mechanisms that you want to put in place, firewalls, IDS, insert name here of data center management software, can still be run into the cloud using those same resources. If you want to have web scale access to that, you can actually create a subnet, think of it as a DMZ, within this walled environment, and allow some internet traffic to come into it while still maintaining a subnet with an ACL that is for, say, production or another type of use. So this provides you the means by which to kind of take the best of both worlds and be able to kind of merge them together. For more details on this, I definitely look up the website, as well as we have a plethora of people around here that will be able to provide you more information, as well as later on today, like I said. So now with that basis, one of the things that we saw is that in the government space, there are a lot of requirements for U.S. persons only types of environments. And as you can imagine, Amazon's an international company. So in a traditional space, we may have people from Canada that have access on the back plane. But one of the things that we actually did for GovCloud is that regional model that we have, where we've gone ahead and segregated or isolated each of these regions that are like isolated clouds to themselves, have now been set up so that we can take that same model and create a region that's for, best of both worlds, U.S. person operated, and both from a physical standpoint, so the data techs that are changing hard drives, all the way up to the administrators that are administrating or managing that are U.S. persons. So you now have an isolated environment that keeps things U.S. person or ITAR compliant if you so choose. So these are the different things, obviously, that we've gone down through. Each of the different portions on there hit on different stacks, if you will, from a security perspective, physical and logical. The nice thing about this environment is that, once again, like I said, all regions are created equal for the most part. GovCloud having one layer additional, and that's the U.S. persons only requirement. So we've had to instantiate controls just for those U.S. persons. So in this case, think of it as a deployment model from the standpoint of commercial cloud or general normal environment, has a security model that actually brings us up to, and recently was awarded a FISMA moderate level ATO by GSA in the commercial cloud environment, because the security controls and the basis for everything that's built on top of that is still running in that same environment. You want to add on the ability for further compliance. Once again, security and compliance, not necessarily the same thing when it comes to terms. If you want to hear more about that, we actually have another session this afternoon. We can chat about it. By adding virtual private cloud, which is that logical isolated network environment that we talked about. Bringing that all together kind of allows you then more compliancy as well as more isolation if you so choose. Then adding on beyond that the AWS GovCloud environment, which then goes ahead and provides that U.S. persons only space. The entire model that we were just talking about here is essentially one that's built on a solid foundation of security. That's the important part, is that what we've done is built an environment that is secure from the foundation and then added capability on top of that, such that we're in a position now that when we launch new regions that are government specific, we're using the same control set. So the federal government's still getting the benefit, or the government customers are still getting the benefit of PCI DSS, or the payment card industry level 1 certification that we have. So in that same compliancy space, you actually gain advantage from these other compliance space, or the other compliance space that we're actually meeting across the board. Before I depart, I flew through that one, so I did pretty good. Wow, I need a drink of water. I guess we'll have a minute for questions. Or not. Sorry. I'll be around for questions afterwards. So one quick thing just before, and I will take a question, even though Reed told me I couldn't. The important part here to remember is that we've built an environment that is set up to be compliant for your needs. We work as a team with you to make sure that that's the case from the compliancy standpoint. We'll be as transparent as we can be without increasing the vulnerability to all of our customers. That's one thing. You can only go so far telling everybody about how you do things before it gets to be a vulnerability. We won't do that because we want to keep all of the data secure. If this gentleman here asked me to provide him a special availability to get to data and details, then this person would want it. And guess what? You don't want to have his information. He doesn't want you to have yours. So we're going to keep that bar. We're going to maintain that bar. We're going to maintain that isolation, even when it comes down to transparency for the certifications and accreditations. We can provide enough in order to meet that trust model that's required without a doubt. But we're also going to maintain the bar high enough so that we're not interposing your information with others. So, gentleman here had a question. I think we'll...
Since you put up the slide, talk about TIC.
Sure. So real quick, the question is a question about TIC. So from the standpoint of U.S. government identifying the many thousands of connections to the internet and bringing it all down into one, or 50, I think was the initial goal, if I remember correctly from my FBI days. So in this environment, one of the things that you have the capability to do in a VPC environment is to go ahead and identify where your traffic actually that VPN connects to. So in the case of needing to meet the TIC requirements, you can actually do so through that VPC model, directing all your traffic through the TIC, then into the cloud, and vice versa. So you have that network routing to be able to do so. So hope that answers your question. That's one way. There are other ways.